One yeehaw from the room. 1, 2, 3. There you go. Well, I just wanted to thank Rachel Jacobs, of course, for putting together a fantastic event. I was here last year, and this event definitely tops last year, and I'm super excited to meet all of you guys today. We've talked a lot about community, and what Rachel. I echo what Scott said earlier. What Rachel's really built is fantastic. It's just very special, and I'm super excited about meeting all the folks here that I don't know. So the point of this panel today, what we want to talk about, of course, everybody's discussing enterprise, but what are we collectively seeing from the enterprise brands that we're working with, and how have their expectations and requirements changed? And then how do we as agencies and tech platforms, how are we adapting and leveraging our solutions to better service those changing needs? Before we get into that, I want to do a round of introductions. So we'll start, Franco, with you, move down the line. Introduce yourself, your title, a little bit about your platform, and an enterprise brand that you are super excited about potentially working with or are working with.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Everyone can hear. Awesome. Hi. Yes, my name is Franco. I'm with Gadget.dev. We're a full-stack web app development platform. So we basically give superpowers to front-end developers and back-end developers to just build apps, specifically Shopify apps, way faster. What that means for the agency is, more money, more revenue opportunities, the ability to churn out more projects faster. So on average, we see apps get built in about 5 times the time it normally takes. And I mean, we work, again, directly with all kinds of agencies of all different sizes, the brands that they work with, sometimes directly, sometimes through them, and then, of course, developers, freelancers, contractors, anybody else who's just looking to build apps. And, they're at all of those tiers, everybody's looking for something different, and I think the key is to remain, super flexible, which I think we'll probably jump into a little bit more. But yeah.
Thanks, Franco.
Yeah, cheers. Echoing everyone else's sentiments, very happy to be here. I'm Neil from Gorgeous. I work in the partnerships team. As you can tell, I'm from the European side of things. In terms of Gorgeous, we are the #1 help desk for e-commerce brands. And what was the other question? An enterprise brand that we work with.
Or would like to.
We work with tons. Like everyone on this panel, everyone from mom and pop brands up to enterprise, but enterprise brands that like Steve Madden, for example, huge customer of ours, long-term customer. And I'll pass it on.
Awesome. I just want to say quickly, Neha, I love that jacket.
Thank you, sir.
I'm going to ask you where you got that from afterwards. But,
Neha is special. He only pulls it out for special
I'm
occasions.
From GrowWave. First of all, I just want to thank Rachel for organizing this. This is an awesome event. Thank you so much for bringing everyone together. Neha, obviously, thank you for organizing this panel. But so I'm Joe Fox, SVP of Partnerships at GrowWave. We're reviews and loyalty. In terms of enterprise customers, we have quite a few. We work with Sony, Crocs, Lego, so we got a few. But also, same thing, and to that sentiment, we work with everyone from mum and pop sort of startup brands right up through to enterprise. But yes.
Awesome.
I feel like I've had a lot of airtime today already. If anyone didn't hear from the past few times I've been on the stage, I'm Hannah. I've just joined Dataships as head of partnerships. A little bit more about what we do. We help brands increase what we call their marketing consent rate. So essentially that means out of everyone who comes through your checkout, how many people can you actually market to? And we really move the needle for Shopify brands. I am very new to Dataships, so I'm not going to share any enterprise brands because they are under NDA.
Well said.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We're a public company, too, so I get in a lot of trouble. Scott here from Klaviyo again. For those of you who don't know, if anyone doesn't know, we power smarter digital relationships through better data, really marketing automation driven. The enterprise brands we work with, it's really, there's so many, can only talk about so many as well, but I love TaylorMade Golf, and really working with the Patagonias of the world has been really, really exciting. Just generally that sort of stature brand, seeing how advanced and sophisticated their strategies are, and how Klaviyo can help power that's been really amazing.
I'm Mark with Churn. I'm the head of customer success. Been with them for 5 years. our panel, just so you guys know, our panel was supposed to have a dress code. And,
like you and I followed
it. Well,
like we did it.
Joe was pretty firm, like, hey, we need to dress up like Western cowboys. So I got this from my mom's closet. It's and the bolo ties from my best friend. But yeah, it's the closet my mom, usually has costumes in for the grandkids. So, but I mean, we got the cowboy boots, we got the hat, and Neil brought the mustache. So yeah, customer success with Churnbuster. So I work with just some of the brands we work with, like AG1, Athletic Greens, JLo Beauty, and ButcherBox. And our team helps companies get started, so kind of sales through discovery, implementation, and then ongoing account management with the brands that we work with.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. I drink AG1 every day, by the way. It's a fantastic brand. I'm Nihal Kulkarni. I should have probably started with that earlier. I'm the managing director and partner over at Roswell NYC. We're a full-service 360-degree e-commerce agency, also targeting enterprise brands. But I wanted to segue into that, guys. How are we defining enterprise brands? You have Shopify's definition, 125 mil annual GMV and up. Then you have Salesforce's definition and Magento's definition and so on. But I think it's important to set the table for the conversation today. Like and this is open to anybody who wants to start, how are you guys defining enterprise? Because one of the things we're going to segue into in the conversation is that enterprise means one thing to an agency or a platform could mean something entirely different to another. So we got to understand where we're going from there. Scott, why don't we start with how Klaviyo, and then we'll pass it around.
Yeah, so at Klaviyo, there is a GMV definition for enterprise, but in this context, I don't think that actually means anything. To me, it's really about, and you see this more often than not, enterprise is really around like the sophistication behind the work they're doing. And more specifically, and this is very real for Klaviyo, when you move up market and work with enterprise, like decisions about Klaviyo are never made in a vacuum. And that's going to be true for every single one of the platforms here when you're working with those bigger brands. So it's more about like how you sell and how you service that type of customer. So enterprise to us means you are always part of a bigger project that you need to know about and sell yourself and how you fit into that bigger project at play.
Anybody else on the panel want to talk? Yeah, Neil?
I also think it's sometimes not about how we define these brands as enterprise, it's how they operationally define and operate themselves. So if they have enterprise style processes, then we need to follow those processes because they consider themselves enterprise. So there's also that to take into account. A small brand might have implemented big enterprise-style processes.
Absolutely. And how are you guys working with agencies to go up market? And when you understand, so this agency, for example, in LA or in Toronto has access to brands in that region and relationships in that region. So how do you focus on working with agencies to target those brands? And are there particular agencies or qualities in agencies that you're looking for in order to be able to co-sell?
I can jump in real
Yeah.
quick. I mean, I think there's a couple of strategies there. I mean, first of all, we'll sort of tier some of the agencies in terms of like, who should we go after? What are they looking for? And I think, again, any small business or tech platform would probably want to take a similar approach. You don't necessarily go right for tier one on your first day because you're probably going to mess something up. You want to sort of grow, in your capacity, their capacity, and then there's a lot of sales enablement. So, I mean, we'll jump on calls with agencies to help close larger clients if they've got security or compliance concerns, where their data is being stored. So it's a very, if you find that right tier 2, tier 1 agency partner that wants to work with you, that's in it, you got to educate them about your project or your product, how you want them to talk about it. You got to be willing to jump on calls to work with them and their clients. And so I think you can kind of do like a VC, is take like a portfolio-based approach to who your clientele is and their clientele as well, and figure out like, hey, if you do a good job on one account, like let's talk about this other account. What can we do there? So some thoughts.
Joe?
I'm going to speak about like probably the more boring parts of it. I think it's like making sure that your paperwork is in order, like making sure you got your legals in order, making sure that you're compliant. I think it like when you're an agency and you're wanting to grow, I think there's this big appeal of like, oh, we want this sexy brand because it's like a household name and it's going to help us grow. And I fully get that. But I also think it's important to understand that you need to have just like the general business things in place. And I say this from an agency perspective. In Australia, I owned an agency. We worked with like Alibaba, Alipay, AliCloud, and that was like the hugest client that was so far out of our realm. But we very quickly had to learn like you have to have your legals in order, like make sure you've got your invoicing in step. Like a lot of these brands aren't going to pay you in 30 days, 15 days. A lot of these larger brands are going to pay you in 90 to 120 days. So I think being really prepared for that as you're moving up market is something that agencies need to think of and prepare for.
I also think that like the nice thing about being a technology partner is that you can help an agency like fill a knowledge gap. So the agency doesn't necessarily need to learn a whole new skill set, but the technology partner can like jump in and give them assistance on selling. They often have much bigger like sales teams than agencies do. So you can really like lean on your technology partners to like help you go to market together, and it's like a better together approach versus I'm just going to go at this on my own. So that's like a way that tech partners can
Well,
help
on that
out.
note, Hannah, what qualities are you looking for? Because at your time at Loyalty Line, now at Dataships, you've worked with a lot of agencies. So what are the key qualities of agencies, and I'm sure a lot of the agencies here want to know, that they should develop or that you are looking for when you're saying, you know what, I'm going to work with them on this deal, and you're bringing it to the table?
I think it's like a lot to do with transparency. So really understanding like how the agency is pitching and how you can slot in to work alongside their services. You can't really expect an agency to change the way they do things because they're partnering with you. And then in addition to that, also it's like just a mutual beneficial partnership. It's like Adrian was saying, it's not just like take. You have to give and take, and it has to be mutually beneficial for the partnership to actually work. And then having like their best interest at heart, like obviously you all have a number on your head, like you're all trying to hit a target, you're all trying to get leads, but how to do that in a way that's actually going to benefit the partnership in the long run instead of just like thinking, oh, I've got to hit my numbers. So
I like that. What is important to enterprise brands, and how do you present the value of your platform? Mark, you and I had chatted about this, and you wanted to give some comments in terms of some examples and stories.
Yeah, absolutely. So just real quick recap on that. As you said,
What is important to enterprise brands,
Yeah.
and how do you present the value of them? How do you present the value to them for Churnbuster or Klaviyo or Dataships, et cetera?
We've had some interesting experiences kind of adopting and adapting our sales process. The difference between an SMB versus enterprise type brand. And one of the keys is, Churnbuster is a very flexible tool. And at certain times we've highlighted the flexibility of it, that it can do a lot of things and it can, there's a ton of functionality. But the real change has been, instead of saying it's flexible, let's say it's targeted, that it solves a very specific problem. And so for us, it's been more about working backwards from a very specific goal, starting in that sales process, starting in discovery, and saying, we can help you solve that specific goal. So instead of this open-ended tool, it's more about, okay, you have this problem. We dig deep in discovery. We know how to solve that problem. And then working with them and showing them how other brands have solved that problem. And all of the value that we're trying to highlight is geared right around that as well.
I like that. Neil, one of your biggest competitors, Zendesk, right?
Is that?
Exactly. Well said.
Never heard of her.
So they've typically been in the enterprise space for some time. So when you're targeting enterprise brands in e-commerce, what is your strategy in terms of presenting the value of Gorgeous versus Zendesk and any of the other players out there?
Oh, wow. Right. I'm not going to go into a big pitch of Gorgeous versus Zendesk, but yeah, they have been around for a long time. particularly in that enterprise space, but it's not just e-commerce that they target. So they're working with like Uber and airlines and these huge non-e-commerce companies, and e-commerce is just a very small part of what they do. So the value that we can then offer, not just any customer of Gorgias who wants to move from Zendesk to Gorgias, but specifically enterprise e-commerce brands, is e-commerce features, or features that are just for e-commerce. And the second part that is crucial is like data. So like very specific e-commerce customer service related data. Like what we've seen is that as we have moved up market and our product has evolved, we're starting to win these enterprise brands based on the data that is now available to them. Whereas previously we would have lost that deal. So data is huge.
Appreciate that. Moving on, we want to talk a little bit about how should agencies be presenting value themselves to enterprise brands when co-selling opportunities come to fruition with your platform. So if anybody had any experiences working with an agency, Joe, how should they be presenting their value? And that's going to be important for them to understand.
I think this is a really good one. Scott and I were kind of chatting back in the green room about this before, and I kind of feel like a bit of a rock star right now in a cowboy hat talking about a green room. But to that point, it's kind of like, I'm going to raid your wardrobe and your wardrobe, Mark. But just saying to that point, I think it's like, actually, I think aligning properly, like really actually having those conversations, having those good touch points, and really getting strategic about it. I think it's like, when you're approaching these big brands and when you're working with these big brands, I kind of touched on it before, there's a whole lot of like minefields to navigate, right? And I think looking at it as a tech partner, you need to be as supportive as possible on that front. And I think if you're aligned with your brand from the start and aligned with the agency from the start, you can really help them win. And I think it's having that communication and actually being a good partner and a supportive partner to help do that.
Scott?
I have another, I've been thinking about this one a lot actually at Klaviyo, and it comes down to one thing to me, and it's incrementality, right? And that can come from two things, either efficiencies, which for a brand or agency actually like equals more margin, or what's the incremental revenue that you're going to drive, right? And so the agencies that I see most successful in pitching larger brands are making that abundantly clear how much money you're saving or the strategies that I'm presenting. We have math that we're going to show you will make you this much more by working with us or with this technology. If you're just saying, someone's coming to you saying, I need XYZ help, your staff augmentation. I'm sorry, you're probably not going to last in this space post-COVID era, right? You need to bring strategic value that's like incremental add to whatever they're doing today. So really keep that in mind when you're having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to say? Yeah, absolutely.
I can add to that, yeah. I've also found, or we found, as you have, one of the differences is who we're trying to make the hero as well in these relationships. And when we work with SMBs, oftentimes we're interacting directly with a founder or a leader in the organization. Enterprise brand, we're working maybe with a head of retention, and we want to help them be the hero. And so it's like, what do they need for that, and what kind of help do they need in terms of highlighting the value that's coming? And so even in the way we build the product and in the reports that we share, it's actually saying, this is something you've done as the head of retention by using our platform. You've leveraged our tool, and you've achieved these results, and we hope you can share it with your team as well internally.
Franco, on the from a gadgets perspective, because you obviously have the platform enables agencies to do so much more. What have you experienced or seen agencies do that's successful when presenting their value?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to touch on, I guess, like adding to Mark's point, like when you're doing an enterprise sales pitch, there's more than one person in the room, there's more than one person involved. They all have different goals and objectives, and so just recognizing, who you're going to make the hero, who's the internal champion, trying to move up to a decision maker. That's really, really critical, and how you present the product to those people and the value and the benefit that they expect to get out of it is really important and should be reflected, in your sales process and your sales collateral, the time you spend with them and that kind of stuff. Maybe a quick second point, just I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it's an older framework called Crossing the Chasm, and I think it's really applicable to here and going up market and can tie to some of the earlier comments of just keeping in mind where you are in that curve in terms of who's adopting, right? There's always people who are going to adopt faster and slower for very legitimate reasons, and just understanding what those reasons are, why they would take a risk with you now versus 5 years from now when you've maybe got a bigger Rolodex and more proof points. So I think those two comments together, it really varies on the agency relationship, but keeping those two things in mind can help you be flexible and adaptable.
Joe, I got one for you. Thank you for that, Franco. For agencies and tech platforms, what percentage of their business or your business or your book of business rather is enterprise, or how much should it be?
Yeah, I think to speak to this one, I'm going to put on my ex-agency owner hat, and I think I kind of touched on it before, right? It's so attractive to be hey, we work with these household brands, right? You're at a barbecue or you're, hanging out with your friends at a bar and you're hey, we just signed this massive brand and it feels like a good thing. But every agency knows that comes with a whole, round of complications, more people to deal with, more people to report to. Some of these larger companies obviously have shareholders that they're responsible to. So there's this whole level of complexity. I saw this really good Google, kind of when Google were doing their really good agency partner kind of things, and it was back in Australia, and there was this conversation. There was a gentleman who was from Canada who owned a very successful agency, and he was talking about this theory of you have your woolly mammoths and you have your hares, and you can't lose sight of going after the hares, which will keep everything feeding, keep payroll going, keep the lights on, keep everything moving forward, by getting blinded by going for the woolly mammoths. And it's something Scott and I sort of have touched on too, is I think for agencies, yes, there's this big appeal to go after these enterprise brands, but I think don't change your level of service for all of your merchants that were there for you when you were getting started. I think that's something to be really mindful of. So I think you got to have a good mix of both. What that mix looks like is different for every agency, right? I think Neha, you work with some incredible brands. There's some agencies that work with incredible brands, but you also need those kind of smaller upcoming brands who are growing, who are eventually going to be one of those big household names. So I think the mix is different for every agency, but I think I just want to touch on this really, if everyone's here from an event that Rachel's running, they'll understand how important it is to have EQ. And I think, a couple of people have touched on that. It's Mark touched on it before around making everyone feel important along the way and enabling them to feel good about what they're doing. And I think if you do that for every brand, the enterprise will come through regardless. And I think that mix will look different for everyone.
Appreciate that. Any other thoughts from the panel on that front?
I was going to just jump in and say that the service level that you were mentioning, these enterprise brands can be quite demanding. So you don't want to put all your resource towards one enterprise brand and then forget about those brands that have been with you from the start. They're super loyal. They were with you from the beginning. At that point, when you brought on these smaller brands, you thought this is the best thing ever. So just remembering where you've come from, and that, like you said, just be patient. The enterprise will come, and it means something different to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that hare and woolly mammoth analogy. That makes a lot of sense. An enterprise deal that we closed took 14 months, and I'm told that's fast, which is crazy to think about. Yeah. So Matt Harris and his talk just recently was talking about 4.0 technology and whatnot, and AI. You could throw a stone and hit 10 people talking about AI, right? It's just how it's happening. I'm sure all of you guys are. Yeah.
I was hoping we were going to avoid the AI thing. I was I haven't heard too many people talking about it. I'm are we going to touch on it?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's important because with 33.2 million businesses that Matt had mentioned that are in the small business arena, are eventually going to be enterprise, a good portion of them, and so on. And what sort of technologies and what is important from a tech standpoint in terms terms of AI, time to value, total cost of ownership, scalability, and any other tools. And Neil, why don't you take it first in terms of how Gorgeous is approaching it, and then let's have the whole panel talk about that too. It's really important.
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge topic at the moment, and what we're seeing is that, and what like we're hearing from the agencies and their clients, is the AI is coming from like board level. Like AI, everyone is hearing about it, and that includes people who sit on the board of these enterprise brands. So what happens is the trickle down effect, and they're like, okay, shit, we need to get AI into our strategy for the next year. How do we do that? And so when people come to us and they say, you know, how can you help us? What's your AI strategy? We are now in a position to be able to say, right, we can help you scale without having to add headcount, because we can make your support team more efficient. But the net effect of all of this is like better customer experience, and which then helps the brand. And there's two things that I've noticed that enterprise care more about compared to like SMBs, and that is like the brand image and their market share. So like this thing goes on to changing like the language that you're actually using with these people. So if you can package up what you're offering as an agency, and for us as tech partners, in the language that they're speaking, like how can we help these enterprise brands gain more market share cost effectively, then that is the stuff that really kind of gets them excited that I've seen.
Awesome. Anyone else in the panel? Joe? AI? Or maybe we start with Franco. Go for it.
Go, Joe.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, I think it kind of comes back to a few things that we've heard this morning about, you know, thinking about the customer journey, like their success, the experience that they're trying to achieve, who you're trying to make the hero. You know, it's easy to throw out buzzwords and have a bunch of stuff, but really at the end of the day, it's what does your tool uniquely do, and who's it for, and how do you deliver that value? And if AI can help you do that faster, or you can bake it into the workflow to make it easier for people to understand, then that's great. I mean, Gadget has some elements of that, but also it's also about doing, you know, some of the first principle stuff. Just instead of starting a project from scratch every time, how can you just make that more efficient for everyone, so you can just skip, you know, that 70% upstart every time and just not even think about it. So I think it's about mixing, yeah, you know, where do you throw in the shiny thing, and where do you just go back to first principles and try to do the basic stuff just better than everyone else, you know, when you're tired and you're stressed and you're just trying to do stuff, you know, quickly. How can you make that better?
Scott and Hannah, your platforms integrate very well with each other and are using a lot of elements of AI in order to be able to have that predictive focus of AI. How is that working for you guys?
Really well, actually.
And sorry, to bookend that question, how is that important, and how are you using it as a tool to sell to enterprise brands?
Yeah, I think piggybacking on the last comment first, actually, the knee-jerk reaction from a lot of agencies, and it frankly was a little bit of mine too, when we launched a lot of our AI features, was like, oh God, is this going to take some of the work I do, right? And I think after sitting on it for a little bit, the answer is a resounding no, and it comes back to that incrementality point. And so you talked about, like, can I do this faster, right? So that's efficiencies gained as an agency. I hope you're not like hanging your hat on the time you spend pushing buttons, creating segments, or like setting up flows, whatever it is. I'd rather you be proud of being able to spend more time, because of AI, on A/B testing, segmentation strategies, et cetera. Like incrementality in that sense, because of AI, helps me and the client save money, which is more margin, and now spend more time on work that's gonna make everyone more money. So it's super important, in my opinion, that you lean in as much as you can. You actually embrace AI as part of your process and talk about it in that way. Because again, that's going to be a big differentiator between like a lot of, again, I've been using that word staff augmentation a lot, like the commoditization that we're seeing in the space. You have to separate yourself from someone who just needs an extra set of hands, so you can spend more time on the things that matter.
Yep. Hannah?
I think you pretty covered it.
You got it? Okay. Well, we're going to wrap up right now. We get time for one question. If anybody in the audience would like to ask the esteemed panelists regarding targeting enterprise, any agencies out there want to learn more?
As long as it's not about AI.
Exactly. A thing that I heard the other day, bookending what you were saying, Scott, is AI is not going to take jobs away from people. It's just going to take jobs away from people who don't use AI. So it's interesting. Well, thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. A round of applause for the panelists.